Hello, everybody. My name is Kelly, and I'm the co-chair of the Disaster and Resilience Interest Group at the Environmental Peacebuilding Association, IMPACTS, and also the co-chair of the Disaster and Conflict section at the International Association of Impact Assessment. And we're co-sponsoring this webinar on field research during the pandemic, challenges and solutions from the perspective of PhD candidates and postdoctoral researchers. So I welcome you to the event. And I'm going to turn it over to the moderator now to take us through the whole process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kelly. And welcome to everybody. I'm glad to see that that you have joined us. And I really look forward to today's presentations and discussions about how to deal with the situation that COVID has led us into with regard to our fieldwork. Before I introduce myself in a few words, I'd like to just go through a few housekeeping rules. I like people to keep their microphones closed while attending the event, and but then for questions, I think you're allowed to ask questions with voice. That's something that actually I forgot to ask. But anyway, use the chat to ask questions. And then if you want me to give your possibility to speak and share your experiences and questions with the others, please just raise your hand and I will let you speak. We will progress so today that we will first listen to all the panelists first, and after that we will turn and open the discussion for all of us. Unfortunately, it is so that Prince will be with us only in the beginning for his presentation, but then he has to leave. We have about 1 hour for today. And after that 1 hour, I will officially close the event. But after that, we have about 15 minutes more that the panelists have agreed to stay online in case there are other discussions, other questions that you would like to ask. Just keep in mind that we are recording this event. And then just a few words about myself. So I'm professor in human geography, with very long-standing interest in natural resource management and different aspects of development, inclusive conflict and peace building, but also climate change and climate mobility, especially in the global south. I'm economist by training, but I do have a very interdisciplinary background, and I work with economists and social scientists, political scientists, anthropologists. I'm familiar with many different methods, although I mainly use myself quantitative methods, which doesn't mean that I don't go to the field. I do go to the field. We do lab in field experiments and randomized experiments and stuff like that. Right now, I'm working quite a bit of citizen engagement and climate change. And last year, so 2020, I was supposed to be part of the fieldwork in Indonesia and Ghana, Bangladesh and Ethiopia. And all that got stopped by the COVID-19, unfortunately. In one sense, that's okay for me, because my project funders understand the situation. So there is no issue with that. And my career no longer kind of depends on this kind of access to field. I can live without 1 year or 2 years access to field. It's personally, it's not a problem for me, but it is a big challenge to my PhDs and my postdoc students that have not been able to collect research material that they were supposed to collect the past year. And it's not, well, often we have salary for them, but the thing is that the salary runs out before they perhaps get to the field and get the material, get time to actually analyze the material. So that has been a challenge. So that's why what we do today is very important. But it's not only about the COVID-19. It's more probably about the access to field. It's often uncertain. it depends on in which countries we work in, but there are also other things that happen in the places where we plan to do field. There might be disease outbreaks, other diseases, there might be conflict, there might be that you don't get the funding that you needed to go into the field. So many different things can happen. Also, something can happen to you. So your family situation changes, and actually you just cannot go and do three months of field work any longer, but you have to do something else. So I today, when we talk about in relation to COVID-19, I think it's what you need to think it's broader. These are the experiences and lessons learned that you can take with you and apply to other situations when you suddenly are without access to field. It's not about the COVID-19, it's much broader. So I'm very happy now to introduce our first panelist, Prince de Makelele Mungumbo, who is a PhD student at the Global Governance and Human Security Program at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. And his research focuses on informal international organizations and treaties negotiations. So thank you, Prince, for being today with us, and the floor is yours for a couple of minutes.
Thank you, Paiva. So my name is Prince Mungumbo Makele. Like she said, I'm a PhD student. I'm in my second year, actually. So I started thinking about my field work. How do I go into there? What do I do? It was a long way to get where I'm at today, and I know that there is still a lot to do tomorrow. So I'm focusing on informal international organizations, especially intergovernmental organizations, and I would like to see how these organizations impact the negotiations, both before the negotiations, during and after the negotiations. And I intend to look into things like the UNFCCC, the Rio +20, and more. Thank you. I might. So I wanted to, how do you share the screen? So I wanted to talk about my field work, what I intended to do regarding my topic. I'm in the social sciences, and this is a qualitative study. So what I wanted to do basically was quals interviews with people that are high profiles diplomat within the United Nations system, or some of them are just diplomat within USAIDs and many NGOs. But also do some kind of archival research. And what I meant here by archival research, I was thinking about personal memos or notes, videos, pictures, and things like that, that these people that have participated to this meeting have in their hands. But also some field work within the United Nations, for instance, headquarters, where I know for sure that I can find things that are very important to me that are not written anywhere or that are not published anywhere, because I must remind you guys that I'm really focusing on the informal side of things. And there is a lot of literature and a lot of like proof that you can find when it comes to like formal meetings, for instance, but not a lot about informal meetings. And that's why I was like, if I go see someone, let's say if I go see Julianne, she participated to a meeting in Rio with, let's say, the United Nations Secretary of X, Y, and Z, she must have something of importance that can benefit my research. But we, as we all know, there was COVID-19 last year and still going on. We still don't know if we're going to get back to normal lives. So some of the challenges that I personally encountered during my, my process of thinking and establishing my plan to going into the field was travel bans. And by travel bans, I just don't mean, for instance, international travels, but I do think that to some extent we also have some a lot of issue going from point A to point B, even within the US, even within the same city, or even within the same community. It's been very difficult. So I was confronted to that because one of the trips I wanted to make was at least go to Colombia to meet some people, but I couldn't do it anymore. I still have a ticket for Paris that I bought last year in March that I can't use, and I have to postpone that trip again. Um, Social interactions today, we still see that you have to stay 6 feet apart to someone to talk to the person. And there is this fear also that if you go see someone, they won't be able to like meet you face to face. They don't know you, they don't know your habits, they don't know what you've been to. So it's really difficult for researchers today to just get into that social interaction. And as you know, when you do research, be it field research or even just remote research, there is this sense of friendship that you create with the person that you're interviewing. You have to make them feel comfortable. You have to be in a position where they trust you. But I also think that trust and making people feeling comfortable comes with proximity, you know. But if we have these restrictions like social interaction restrictions, it makes it hard for you to collect your data. Finding problems also, a lot of like grant opportunities, like I use the term disappearance, they have disappeared, like you can see them no more, you know. The future was in certain few months ago, so it's been very difficult for me personally to find more funding, and that would allow me to cover my daily expenses, so that I can focus on my studies and not be out there doing a second or third job. Um, but also lacks access to libraries. Our libraries has been closed since last year, and it's been difficult that you can't find everything online. There are still books that you have to go find in the stocks that were very important to my research, but I couldn't use. So I had to stop, pause a little bit and be like, okay, what can I do? And of course, the anxiety and depression, today there are research about anxiety and depression related to COVID-19. So these are some of the challenges that I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys also have been encountering since we had this we witnessing this pandemic. So how do I personally mitigate this these issues? Well, I started by, and this is something that I find very important and very useful to me. I started by rethinking my entire research design, because your field research is based on on your research design. So I was like, okay, if I can't go out there in the world, meet people, talk to them, read in their books, and do some really field research, what can I do? And this was a long it was a lot to do, but when you like what you're doing, when you're very committed to what you're doing, time is accessory. Means nothing. You focus to it, you commit to it, you do it. So I started with thinking my research design, which I'm still in the process of finishing. But also I contacted a lot of friends. If my library has less access to journals, I have a bunch of friends in Europe, Canada, Africa, US. So I always circulate emails like, hey, I'm looking for this book. Can you guys find it in your library? And they find it, they download, they send to me. So at the beginning, it was very difficult to find all these things. But then as I realized that this is normal life now, I started just shooting emails and messages here and there, and then receiving all those books. And depending on where you stay as well, or where you currently live, there are websites that you can access where you can find books and articles for free, even the most recent one. But also what I did was in times where I couldn't advance in my studies, what I did was building skills that I always postpone. Like there is always something that we think that we're going to do tomorrow. Like, oh, that's for tomorrow. But I was like, this is the time for it. I don't want to sit on the couch, for instance, watching TV. You are a PhD student, okay? So even if you're not a PhD student, but you were a student, you shouldn't be sitting on your couch watching TV for hours and hours every day, or spending time on social media scrolling and going on TikTok watching videos. Do something, right? If you take at least 20 minutes a day, that will build the skill. So there are many places like EDX, Coursera, and of course YouTube. A lot of things out there but you have to be careful also by YouTube, because not everything online is true. So I built some skills about things that was very important to me, but I always postpone. But also I did some kind of community service, but also help the people that I felt needed help. I speak French, that's my native language. I spent a lot of time with some people, teaching them basic words. And of course, that's also a way of helping myself, because living in a country where French is not spoken, you start losing a little bit of yourself and a little bit of your what makes your identity as, you know, a French speaker. So it's a way also to improve yourself and to just not forget what you've been speaking for years. But as a PhD student, or as a student in general, there are things like papers that you always wanted to write. You have a bunch of notes on your desk about things that ideas that you had that you wanted to write. So I've been doing that a little bit. I must say that I haven't finished any of them yet, but a couple of them are up there for review to my professors for feedback, which is not a bad thing. So that's also one way to just mitigate all them. So there is also some self-care, you know, avoid alcohol, do more physical research, exercise, you know, stretch management, healthy diet, everything. Those things are very important, because if you don't really take care of yourself, there is no way that you can have a very productive and very brilliant research. So those are some of the mitigation means. They're not like a gospel song. They're not universal truth, but you learn to adapt in your own way. But I know that you can also learn from somebody else. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prince. And there is one question to you, if you have time to answer that one. There is Eva Hilt, who is asking, telling that Prince, thanks for sharing your experience. You just mentioned you did some cognitive research. What do you mean by that? Do you have time to
thank you,
shortly answer that one?
Yeah, thank you, Peva. Hi, Eva. I meant community service. I'm sorry for my accent. Community service in a way that, you know, make yourself more valuable for your community. There is a lot going on in our communities today. People need help. People need people of all ages and genders and races. So there is something in the community that you feel that you can, you know, help build, please go out there and do it. So that's, I think, one way as well. I know that it doesn't per se advance your research in terms of COVID, but you never know. As a student, you have your mind open, you learn from everything. You learn from interacting with people. If you're studying, let's say, I don't know, I'm not a scientist, but you're studying the moon, right? And you pose your research, you go out there, you speak to this, let's say, old lady or old man. That conversation, you never know, can inform you on your research about the moon. So go out there, trying to help and lift up your community.
Thank you so much, Prince, for your thoughtful thoughts and your consideration for your community as well. So I think that's really laudable, and I wish you all the best. Then we will continue and go to our next panelist, who is Katrine Smith. No, I'm sorry, Juliane Schillinger, who is a PhD student at University Twente in Netherlands. Her research focuses on water management, local water management in the settings of conflicts, armed conflicts. And I think your focus is in the Middle East, isn't it?
Yes, very much. Let me just quickly share my presentation. Yes, so as Päivi mentioned, my focus is on the Middle East, on local water management. And when I say Middle East now specifically, I mean 4 countries, which is Palestine, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. This is a mostly qualitative, very exploratory research, as there is unfortunately not yet a lot of academic research really on the impacts of armed conflict on water management. And as a qualitative researcher, I like to see things and I like to talk to people. So for me, it was always important to be able to do some field work during this research. And now, especially Syria and Yemen aren't exactly the best countries to do field work for. So it was always clear that those would not include field work. but for Palestine and for Iraq, fieldwork was always intended and to a certain degree also has been completed. So I started my PhD in 2018 in the Netherlands. It's 4 years long, so ideally I will finish at some point in summer 2022. And immediately when I started, I jumped into a collaboration with several Palestinian universities that gave me a lot of insights on different Palestinian cases to study, and also meant that I could spend time both in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip to do field work. I then, in 2019, went to the Kurdistan region of Iraq for a week. That wasn't particularly long, but it gave me the opportunity to make a couple of contacts and to connect with people there. And then the plan was always to come back and also to go to Iraq proper to do field work in Iraq. So that was the plan for 2020, for which, yeah, I had a lot of ideas. And for me as a researcher, it was very, very important. What then happened was that through my scholarship foundation, the Heinrich Böll Stiftung in Germany, I got the opportunity to do a trip to Israel and Palestine with a couple of other scholarship recipients. So I slightly moved the Iraq fieldwork to summer and figured, you know, first I go to one place, we'll do a little bit more research in Palestine, come back, catch my breath for a bit, and then I will fly to Iraq. Yeah, that was an optimistic plan. It worked up until early March. So we went to Israel, we went to Palestine, we had this trip. And then I just arrived basically in Bethlehem in the West Bank and started my fieldwork there. And then COVID hit basically. And it hit quite literally because the morning I left Bethlehem to move to my actual fieldwork area, the first cases of COVID-19 were discovered in the West Bank, right in Bethlehem. And within a couple of hours, basically, I just made it out of Bethlehem, the entire country shut down. So the Palestinian Authority put in regulations on you weren't allowed to stay over as a foreigner anymore. You weren't allowed to move between the governorates. And ideally, you know, just basically get all the internationals out of the country. Israel at the same time started closing its borders, had already banned the Germans from entering the country, but you know, I was already there. So I got quite dicey, and yeah, then for me it was clear basically I had to leave the country. And that was the start for pretty much everything falling apart what I had in terms of plans. As you can see here, I left the country. I managed to go back to the Netherlands, go back to the office on campus for 1 day. Then university sent us all home to work from home. And I basically have not been back in the office since then, apart from 1 day at some point in September. We entered lockdown, there were travel restrictions, both from the university towards us, but also just from the government. And it was clear my Iraq fieldwork in summer is not gonna happen. So we postponed it to fall. That was rather optimistic. In fall, we then sat down, looked at the situation again. We decided to postpone it again, especially because there was still a lockdown, there were still those travel restrictions. There were mobility restrictions in Iraq that Prince already also mentioned, in terms of even if you can enter the country, you might not be able to move around a lot. And doing field work, if you can't actually go places, is rather tricky. So that was postponed again. And then I had a chat with one of the contacts that I made when I was already in Kurdistan in 2019, towards the end of 2020. And he basically just told me, yeah, no, Julian, that's just not going to happen. Like, forget it. You might be able to fly to Kurdistan, but why would you want to? But you're not going to get a visa for Iraq. They're not going to give you one. And that was basically the end of the field work. It was clear, yeah, if I want to at some point graduate from this PhD, I need to find a different way. And so that brings me to the hopefully somewhat optimistic, more positive outlook. What did I do to deal with the situation? The first point, of course, when I came back in spring was, you know, start on things that don't need field work. And lucky enough, half of the countries in my research were never going to be fieldwork anyway. So I basically sat down, I worked on Syria, I worked on Yemen. I managed to get in touch with another researcher here in the Netherlands who is doing very interesting research on Yemen. And we're currently working together, which also led me to be allowed to basically access some of his primary data from his research on Yemen. So now I also have interview data from Yemen that I would not have had otherwise. And then the other thing that happened was that with the help of some of those connections I made back in 2019, I managed to set up what I like to call my virtual fieldwork, which is actually happening right at this moment, these weeks. So I now spend a lot of time on Zoom, not just in webinars, but also interviewing a lot of stakeholders in the different Iraqi cities that I'm looking at, because I can work with local contacts there who basically do the legwork for me. So that was the point where for me it got really, really clear that, as Päivi already said, of course, this is a special situation, but it's not as unique to pandemics for us. We work on conflict countries. Fieldwork is always going to be an issue. But just having these contacts, having the collaboration is so important. And I do hope that is something we can take with us as we're moving forward out of this pandemic again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julian. And now we are going to move to our next panelist, who is Katrine Smith, who is a PhD candidate at the University College London. And she had planned research in the mining industry in the British Columbia, which then as well got disrupted by the pandemic. So please, would you share your experiences, Katrina?
So yes, my story has got some overlap with two people, as I think lots of people do. I'm at UCL, still am at UCL, and my research is kind of broadly. I'm lucky in the sense that I'm from three backgrounds. So I have a master's in spatial planning or environmental decision making, conservation science, and in crime science, which I know on paper they don't look like they have much overlap, but they do. I have managed to link them together in my research, and this has kind of been the thing that has really helped me in this pandemic. Really, is that I'm not just in one discipline, and I think it's really helpful when you're trying to be a bit more adaptive about a situation like a global pandemic. So I'm looking at kind of crime science frameworks to understand wall breaking in biodiversity conservation strategies in the mining sector. And it was going to be focused in Canada, and it's still, my first part is in Canada, in British Columbia. And so here I was in March 2020, and on the last Thursday that I spent in UCL, the last day I've been there, I had a meeting with my supervisors, and there was kind of an eerie feeling in London. And I can remember thinking, I think I'm going to take my library books back to the library, because I have a feeling I'm not coming back for a while. And then all the students in my department had the news on, and our leader, who's I don't have much to say about, said actually, when we said there was only a few cases of COVID, what we actually meant is there's tens of thousands of cases of COVID in the UK. But it's okay, because we're going to go with the herd immunity strategy. So I went home thinking, wow, okay, things are going to have to change a bit. And then I was planning to go to the University of British Columbia for a year, and I was going to go with my family. I was going to go with my husband and children, and I was going to be at the university. I was going to be at not the Vancouver campus, but I was going to be in Kelowna, and I was going to be part of 2 research groups, the Okanagan Institute for Biodiversity Resilience and Ecosystem Services, and the Centre of Environmental Assessment and Research. And I was really excited about this because in my department at UCL, I'm in the crime science department, so I wanted to be able to link my research and ground it in the other disciplines. Bags packed, ready to go nearly. And my research in the past has been quite varied. It's gone from qualitative interviews to focus groups, concept mapping with community groups. I've used photo voice in the past with various groups, which has been useful. And obviously and semi-structured interviews. So I've had both mixed methods, qualitative and quantitative interview data, which I've always enjoyed, and I think the mix is really important. But I've also done research with specific biological methodologies. So I've done transects before, and I was going to do some ground proofing, going to specific mine sites, which was all set up with the university. And I've done focal animal sampling in South Africa on baboons. And I've done some biologging. And I was going to do this kind of combination. And it wasn't all set in stone. The first stage of the project was sorted out, and that was the initial focus groups. But the biological part hadn't yet been ironed out. That was going to happen when I got there. So I went from this to this, which is basically a balancing act, which I think lots of people do. I'm a part-time PhD student. Like I say, I've got twins who were 3 at the time. Right at the beginning, I think my husband and I both got COVID, so that was a really tricky month. But I think what happens is that, in a way, a global pandemic is easier, than something that's really localized, because it's everybody's new norm. It's something that everybody's experienced at the time. And as that, new opportunities do arise. And so my collaboration with the University of British Columbia is a little bit on hold, but it's still there. I'm still part of that. I've created new collaborations. There's been a lot of flexibility and kindness within UCL community. And within our department especially, and in all disciplines, COVID-19 as a research topic has kind of gone off the scale. So I think that even though it hasn't worked out to plan, my PhD has kept moving. And I think it might be because I'm part-time, so I've been able to kind of have that flexibility. But so I think what's also helped me is that I am within these 3 different disciplines. And there's quite a broad scope within my research. And so I didn't have to stick with the original plan. And interviews can go out via SurveyMonkey, and you can do, I've been able to do online face-to-face interviews, which has helped. Like Prince said, it's an opportunity to learn a new skill, and remote sensing is one of those. There's things that you can do with a little bit of creativity. I think if the research that I'd done in the past, I had done a research project on crop raiding of primates in Sierra Leone. I don't know quite if that had been my PhD field research. Not entirely sure how I would have adapted that. And like the baboons in South Africa, not quite sure how I would have adapted that. At the moment, we're in lockdown again, so we're not really in a position to think about research going forward. University of British Columbia aren't accepting people, or I don't think they're accepting people from the UK at the moment, and UCL wouldn't let me go anyway. But I think it's important, just the other thing that's kind of kept me going through all of this is a PhD is a PhD, and I need to get to the end of the PhD. And yes, it's important to enjoy the process, and yes, it's important to get as much out of it as possible. And yes, it's important to collaborate as much as possible. But equally, it's not the only part of your career. So moving on, that there will be, if you look back and go, okay, I submitted it, hopefully I will submit it, and yes, I didn't do what I intended to do, but I did X, Y, Z instead. It doesn't mean I can't go back and do those things. I think maintaining relationships, maintaining thought processes, maintaining the research question that you have, even if you change the context. And I think changing the context, so I think the data, the amount of data that is online that you can use and you can supplement, and it is amazing. It makes you kind of have to delve a bit deeper if you're not just using the data that kind of creating your own data. But you never have a counterfactual, so you never quite know. I will never know what would have happened if I had gone. But equally, I think keeping options open for the future is helpful.
Thank you for your thoughts, Katrina. And then we will move to our last panelist, which is Diana Vela Almeida, who is a postdoctoral fellow at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology at the NTNU in Trondheim, Norway. And her work focuses on environmental governance. And I think you were in Indonesia when the COVID hit your research.
Okay, first, thank you so much to the organizers, to INPACS and IAA, and especially to Baby for inviting me to discuss this important, very, very important conversation regarding fieldwork for young scholars. So I want to talk about my experience. Yes, indeed, as Baby said, I was in the middle of fieldwork when this pandemic started. So I had planned to do fieldwork in Indonesia in a small island there for around 5-6 months. And I started in January last year. The first month I took an intensive language course. And then for the second month, I went to the field. My research is about post-mining activities, what people do after mining, places that can change economically, and what are the alternatives regarding post-mining economies. So I started my fieldwork. It was kind of a ethnographic approach, and then 3 months later there was the outbreak that started in Indonesia. So there was no lockdown, but the situation was becoming quite risky, and it was a hard decision, but I had to stop the fieldwork. And I thought that it was, even though there was no lockdown yet, that was a sense of responsibility towards my participants and also towards me. I didn't want to risk anybody in this situation. So I think all of us have mentioned that within our academic life, we are living now in a very difficult time with continuous uncertainties. And we are struggling on knowing exactly when this is going to end, what are we going to do, what will happen. I mean, it's been more than 1 year and we still are very unclear of what is going to happen in this year or in the following years. And the fact that we had to change our plans, our schedules, definitely brings a lot of distress, of anxiety, frustration, because we had to interrupt our daily routines. And I think it is even harder, like total solidarity, especially for PhD candidates, because I think there is a more internal pressure on our research expectations, or dealing with the grants or dealing with the deadlines that we initially have defined. So thinking about rescheduling or replanning has been hard to all of us, but I think it is necessary in order to continue with our research. So I think I want to talk about three main elements that I think are important to this discussion. So one, I think, and probably one of the most important, is that no feeling of blame or culpability should be borne upon our shoulders. These are situations that are beyond ourselves, and we had to take that, accept that, and then define what we are going to do with that. And definitely a second point is that we're not alone on this. So I think it is not beneficial to create or keep our self-imposed perceptions, or even worse, external pressures to deliver as if these are normal situations, because this is not normal conditions, and we have to accept that, and we have to learn to work with that. So I think it is important also to think about the ways we produce and productivity, especially not producing despite of the pandemic, but because of the pandemic, we had to reimagine the ways we produce and think the whole issue of what production or productivity means. And the third point is that our priority is to take care of our personal needs, what we need in a situation where we don't feel at peace. We need to deal with our personal feelings, with personal situations, what is going on in our homes, with our family, with our life. And then after that, it is becoming easier to think about new avenues for our fieldwork. And I think it is a great opportunity also to be creative, to find other forms of access to information. There's a lot of, it's been 1 year, so there's a lot of resources at our disposal, ethnography, how to conduct ethnography digitally, interviews, working with our partners in the field is really important. I think a key recommendation will be engaging in discussions, broad discussions with our peers. Again, we're not alone, so I think when you discuss honestly with other people, with your supervisors, with other academics, with your peers, you'll find easier ways to find how to access to information. So I also think partners in the field are key. I also have been, because I had to stop my fieldwork, I had now been collaborating with another colleague of mine that did fieldwork before me. So now we have shared our information, and now we're working in a paper together. So definitely a good advice to contact the people that have done already fieldwork in the places where you have been, or in topics that are related to that. So for me, I was able to do some interviews digitally, but we also had to be aware that that is a situation where you probably will have access to people that have the privilege to access to internet with quality internet, or so that creates also I guess a sense of inequality of access to certain people that doesn't necessarily will be able to reach via the internet digitally. I think there's a lot of sources of secondary information you can get, but also if you're not able to conduct fieldwork, I think it is really important to catch up with writing and also with reading. I guess most of you will have the same feeling that you never have enough time to read as much as you wish. So I think it is also a good, let's say, excuse to have more reading in your life. But let me change. How do I? And so I wanted to share this nice figure because I have found really comforting publications. One is on why we should ignore the coronavirus inspired productivity pressure that was published as an op-ed by Aisha and Matt. And this paper that was published on ethics of care in academia in times of coronavirus by Corbera et al. That was published last year. And I really like this figure because it talks about more the deepest structural challenges of COVID and how we can act upon that. And so for us, I think it is important to discuss beyond what to do regarding our specific work on how we actually use COVID to change the whole structure of the way we conduct work in academia or how we work in academia. So as I said, they published 10 guidelines and to focus on care especially. So the first one, I don't think I have time to talk about all of them, but the first one is to define priorities. So to focus on care of collective and personal care with your peers, with your family, with yourself, and think especially about inequalities. So how COVID has even accentuated the inequalities that we have had and how we can act upon that. And the third one, as I mentioned, is to redefine what we mean by excellence, right? There has been in academia constant pressure to be more productive, to publish more. So they say we need to reconsider the whole thing. So publish less but publish with more quality, the whole idea of slow academia. Redefine also the way we evaluate work and also be more flexible with deadlines. I think that is important, especially I'm very conscious about the extra work that women in academia has had. So there has been already discussions of how women have been able to submit less articles than men because we're more in charge of the whole economy in the household, right? The whole economy of care. Think about prioritizing hiring and how you use the funding that you have. So as Peggy mentioned, the funding is a really difficult consideration because you have funding for a specific set of times. But for example, in case that there has been some savings on planned meetings or workshops that didn't happen these years, so how can we use this budget to help the conditions of researchers that are in need, especially prioritize young researchers, PhDs, the ones that are in more precarious situations as temporal workers. How we are disseminating, think about new research practices, etc. I think it is a really nice article that I would recommend for all of you to read. And with that, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diana. Also lots of good thoughts and advice there. What I'll do now, I will open the floor for questions and comments. So there are 3 options. So you can write your question or comment in the chat or in the question and answer answer box. So you find those usually on the lower end of your window, and there you can click either on the chat or on the Q&A buttons. You can also write me a chat message and I will open your microphone so that you can actually talk and ask your question or provide your comment or your experience in life. So please please use those. We have one question that came from Dorcas Firi, who asked that how do you do virtual fieldwork or digital fieldwork? I think both Juliana and Diana mentioned this. So if you used a minute to give your idea how it can be done.
Sure. Thank you for the question. Very, very good question. And I think especially one that we all asked ourselves, especially at the beginning of this. Personally, for me, it's reasonably easy because my fieldwork, to a large extent, consists of speaking with people. So I can do that via Zoom or via other online platforms. It gets, of course, a little bit more difficult when you really want to see what's going on in the field and you want to have community engagement and you want to have a lot more methods that go into ethnographies of your study area. And I think in that sense, Diana probably knows a little bit more about those kind of things than me. I also saw that Catherine actually works with quite some of those methods when she can. So maybe she also has some thoughts. What I do want to point out is that very early into the pandemic, and I think that was already in March or April in 2020, a group of anthropologists actually started compiling a rather large compendium on sort of doing fieldwork in a pandemic and then using virtual means. And I found it very, very interesting because it got sent to me by a colleague at some point and she was like, hey, is this something that would help you? And so that really goes into details on how to use different social media platforms, using video, using pictures, basically giving local populations small assignments to do in terms of helping you to see their own communities from their perspectives. And so that was very, very interesting. And I think also overlaps a little bit with different citizen science approaches to use different apps and basically use technology to get a better impression of what your field looks like.
If you have a link to it, can you put it in the chat?
Yeah, I will check because I only have it as a PDF without a link.
Okay.
I will do some Googling. Well, maybe the others can add some.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Yeah, definitely agree with Julianne. There are a lot of resources that are coming out on, I saw, for example, a course on how to do ethnography digitally. So definitely, and look for advice with other people that have more experience. But I think I'll focus on the answer of, for doing interviews or more ethnographic work in the places that you no longer can go, I think it is key to work in collaboration with your partners, especially local partners, because they know the site better and they'll be able to direct you with the people that you could contact them. So I don't think we are able, if we're far away and we don't know much about this area, it's definitely more challenging. So yeah, definitely work with partners that are in the field, that live in the field or have close relationships with. And the other thing is that if you are working with populations that are marginalized or poor group of people, definitely for them it's more difficult to have access to internet. So think of the ways on how these people can actually can connect. So for example, paying for the data that they will consume, right? Because I mean, this is work for them. It is work, right? They could do any other activity, but they are helping us, and they don't have enough resources. So maybe consider paying the data so they can spend, I don't know, a certain amount of data for talking to you and providing you with information to your research.
Thank you. Katrine, do you want to add something?
No, I mean, I think, yeah, the collaborations, and I think it kind of depends who you're working with. And I think that there are a lot of resources out there. And I think people's acceptance of doing things online has just kind of gone through the roof. And I think you can kind of stage your research as well. So like I've done, there's a lot of digital stuff I can do. Oh, I've lost something. I'm gonna move over. A lot of, you know, mappings and things that I can do to get a better idea. And I had gone on courses before, and so I think you just have to adapt to the technologies that you have available to you. And I think it depends. I'm lucky at UCL because I've got a lot of software. I've got access to a lot of software that I've wanted to use and then I've been able to use. So, I mean, not just in terms of, you know, things that I hadn't really spent time using before, like Envivo, which you kind of, I think you can hone your skills now in the anticipation that you're going to go out later. So I think you just have to flip things on their side a bit as well, and not do it in, I don't think PhDs are linear, but I think it's important, even more so in a pandemic, to be a bit more kind of less linear about your approach.
Good. We have also a question from Eva Helt, who asked, this goes directly to Julian, but I think the others can also chime in. Eva writes that when you were talking about that we postponed, so did you mean you and your university supervisor? And perhaps more generally to you, so how did you experience the collaboration with your supervisor under the pandemic? And now I'm adding kind of my question here at the same time, like what were the challenges with your supervisors with regard to working under these very special conditions? And if Julian, again, you start and we go from there.
I have to be a little bit careful because I can see my supervisor as an attendee here. But luckily, I also know she doesn't mind. No, indeed, when I say we postponed, that was in discussion with my direct supervisor and also with my promoter, with my professor, who's a second person then. So I have this supervisor team basically of my professor and a more hands-on daily supervisor. And honestly, I was very happy with the situation in terms of supervision and support. I swear I don't just say that because she's here. I think it helps, and that is just a very, very general PhD thing, I think, to have a good and also a personal relationship with your supervisor. And I think especially in a situation like this, supervisors are also the ones where we should be able to turn to for, of course, research related issues, but also just to get guidance generally on how do I deal with a situation like this while being in academia. And Prince mentioned earlier that there are mental health issues that are to be considered, especially PhDs who are working in a different country that is not their home country, who might be sitting by themselves in their small apartment because they're not allowed to go to university. They can't really socialize with other people. So I do think it is very much also the task of the supervisors to help out here and provide that guidance, not just as fellow researchers, but also as fellow humans. I think in an ideal situation as a friend, so that you are able to really openly discuss what's going on and what your concerns are.
Thank you, Julian. And Diana and Katrina, I'm going to let you talk as well. But before that, because now it has been 60 minutes we started, so I'm thanking all who has attended this webinar today, and especially the panelists. So thank you so much. As I said, we will go for a few minutes over now. So those who have the opportunity are very welcome to stay. And we will continue now first with Diana and Katrina, kind of telling what is the role of the supervisor and their expectation to us as the supervisors, which I'm very interested to hear. And then I have a couple more questions here that if we have time, we will also get answers to that. But first, thank you to all of you for coming. And I don't know if Kelly wants to say a word at this point.
I'm good. I'm really enjoying it. Just keep going. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Thank you, Kelly. So Diana.
Well, thanks, baby. I don't have much to say there because for me it's a little bit different. And I also think I feel also very grateful because it's very liberating having to move away of this. I will say almost self-imposed pressure of I had to deliver, I had to prove that I'm able to do this. Because we are all struggling. Believe me, like I know people that have a lot of experience that have been in academia for a lot of time that are also struggling. We are all struggling. So I think we had to break free from that. But I also will say that it's a responsibility, a really important responsibility for senior academics to think about what is the role on I'll say the ways in which young scholars, especially PhDs, master's students as well, are doing with the whole situation, are dealing and coping with pandemic, and what are the ways of helping them, and the ways especially to try to think about the whole academia and redefine what we consider as our work within universities.
I think the biggest challenge that I've had with, I mean, my supervisor's been fantastic. Well, I've got two supervisors. The biggest challenge I have had is balancing normal life as well, because I'm a parent and schools have obviously shut. Well, not that they're out of school, childcare shut. And I also work as well. So there's kind of a lot of juggling. And my supervisor's been really firm, but supportive. And I think it's quite a hard balance. And it's probably because I know him well, and I know that he's thinking about my research. And I think that always really helps if you know that your supervisor is thinking about your research. Sometimes he forgets to tell me that he's thinking about a certain part of my research. And I think it's also having the confidence to reach out to other people beyond your supervisors and get expertise. I think my work, new opportunities in work have kind of come up which are related to my research. So I think it's kind of having that flexibility and adaptability and being able to say to your supervisor, I think they just want to know that you're continuing and that you're not lost. And I think regular contact, and I enjoy doing the online supervisor meets because you get to share the screens, you get to record it. I just think there's a lot of benefit to working this way, as well as not benefits. And I think when you kind of put aside the challenges, then it gets a bit easier.
Thank you. We then have a question about, I think it's especially, this is important when you're supposed to do field work in a place, area, and country where you haven't been before, and you really haven't yet established any contacts in that place. So how do you get contact with the local partners, the peers, the students, and how do you institutionalize that cooperation? Katrina, I think, yeah.
So for me, being able to, I was kind of lucky in the sense that already establishing a relationship with the university. So there's a whole kind of network associated with that. I think about research that I've done in the past and what a nightmare that might have been. Although, like Diana says, you just really make sure that you put time and effort into establishing the relationships that you have, and kind of and realizing that they're in a tricky position, but they are wanting to help, and making sure that they're helped for their time. I think it's not being afraid to ask questions as well with your within your group. If you kind of do a little bit of background research on the people you do know to find out the people that they know, and kind of linking on is important to show initiative.
Yeah, I also, yeah, Julian.
Yeah, just to quickly jump onto that. I did find it very hard to establish completely new collaborations. So indeed, what really worked for me was just following up with people I already knew and who were familiar with either my work or my person, so they knew, I'm at least reasonably trustworthy and I do good stuff. And then they could pass you on to the next person. Then you spend a little bit of time building a relationship with that person, and maybe they pass you on to somebody else. And in an ideal scenario, you can make those connections during field work or just doing a short field stay ahead of your field work. So now it just all takes, I think, quite a bit longer and is a little bit more intense in terms of following up again and just making sure that connection stays alive. But then it can really, really pay off. And I also do agree that, especially in this situation where we are so dependent on working with local populations, working with local organizations, we need to make sure that they are properly acknowledged, that they are properly compensated where necessary. Yeah, because they are our partners. They're not research subjects or anything. They're our partners, and we can't do our work without them.
Thank you so much. And I think it's almost about the time that we need to close this discussion. Just from my side, I would like to first thank you, all of you, but then especially I would like to thank you for sharing your insight with me, because I also learned things today, and which I think I can take with me in the future, not only thinking the COVID-19, but also later on as I am hope to continue to be a PhD supervisor and supporting early career researchers, not only PhDs, but also after that point. So I would like to thank you so much for sharing your insight and advice today. And I will just let you, all of you, say a few words to if you want to. You don't need to say one more point or restate what you think has perhaps been the most important thing that you have learned, or what you will take with you in the future as a researcher. And let's go the other way around. So we start with Katrina, and then Diana, and then Julian as the last one.
I mean, I think flexibility is, you always need to have flexibility in your research, and there's nothing like a global pandemic to put that into perspective. But it's also not only to expect flexibility from other people, but be flexible to them. So if you're kind of reaching out and they're not responding to your email straight away, then, stuff might be going on. And I think this is just a point in time. And unfortunately, there isn't, a year in, and there isn't clarity of how we're not going to be in this situation. But being pragmatic and flexible, I think, helps.
I'll just want to thank the organizers, thank Pavey for this really important discussion that we have. It's been now more than 1 year, but I think this discussion is still relevant to all of us, and it should keep going on. And the only thing that I'll say is what I just, I guess I'll reiterate what I said is I don't want to go back, or we shouldn't push to go back to a normal time before pandemic, because it is, for academics, it's really difficult to handle things. And the COVID has even accentuated these challenges that we all have. So it is not about how we are working in academia despite COVID, but how we use COVID to change things definitely for good and focus on care and focus on quality and focus on like putting a lot of effort on the people that we care on the field side with the people that we're working on.
Yeah, I think pretty much what Diana said. I do hope that as much as the current situation is challenging, and I think we're all just absolutely sick of it by now, not in a literal way, hopefully. I do hope we can take positive things out of this. Part of that is rethinking how academia works and rethinking how we are pressuring ourselves. But I also do hope that as the environmental peacebuilding community, we can take more out of it and really highlight this aspect of how important research collaboration is, of how important data sharing is when we're working on countries where access to data, and whether that's field data or other kinds of data, it's just not always that easy. Of course, a pandemic is a bit of an extreme, but this is a challenge that will probably not go away. And right now we're learning a lot of how to deal with that. And I do hope that we remember it, even when we are able to go to the field again.
And I think with this word, we will end this webinar. And thank you again for joining us today. And I wish you all very good end of the week and end of the day. And I look forward to meeting you, all of you, in different situations in the future, most likely virtually. But that's very fine. Okay, thank you so much. Bye bye.